Protagonist, Maren. Antagonist, Alpha Caldris. Primary question: what arrives at a grieving elderly Omega's door 3 days after her wolf dies? And why does its presence shatter every known law of the pack? Maren collapsed against the frozen earth, clawing at her own chest as the silver thread binding her to her wolf snapped like a bone breaking inside her soul. Blood poured from her nose, and her mouth opened in a scream that shattered every window in the Omega quarters, sending pack warriors stumbling backward as a force they couldn't name ripped through the compound. What happened in the next 3 days would become Howlridge legend, a story whispered about for decades. Maren's knees hit the frozen ground beside the dead wolf, and her fingers dug into silver fur that would never warm again. The body was stiff, jaw locked open, eyes clouded to milk. Her bonded companion of 43 years, gone between one breath and the silence that followed. What happened in the next 3 days would become Ashenmoor legend, a story whispered about for decades. Now listen. Maren wasn't some frail thing people pitied from a distance. She was 81 years old, the lowest-ranking Omega in a pack of 300, and she'd outlived every wolf her age by a decade. Her hands were gnarled from decades of mending nets and skinning elk, and when she stood up from that frozen body, she didn't cry. She walked to the pack hall, pushed open the double doors, and stood in front of Alpha Caldris, while mud and frost clung to her knees. "My wolf is dead," she said. "I need the burial rite." Caldris barely looked up from his maps. Broad-shouldered, mid-40s, jaw built from granite and arrogance. He ran Ashenmoor the way a man runs a machine. Everything had a function or it got removed. He spoke 2 sentences. Burial rites are for ranked wolves. Omegas bury their own. Maren's hand closed around the edge of his table. Her knuckles went white. Sable served this pack for 4 decades. She tracked your father's kills before you could walk. Caldris finally raised his eyes. "Then my father can bury her." "Oh, wait." Believe me, the room felt that one. 6 council members at the long table, and not one of them moved. Maren held his stare for 3 full seconds, then turned and walked out without another word. She buried Sable alone, dug the hole herself with a rusted spade behind her cabin, breaking through 2 inches of permafrost while the sun dropped. Nobody helped. Nobody came. Get this. In a pack that size, not a single wolf crossed her threshold that night. Day 1. After the death, Maren stopped eating, not on purpose. Food just tasted like chalk. She sat in her chair by the window where Sable used to rest her head on Maren's thigh, and the absence was a physical weight pressing on her chest. But she didn't sit long. She got up, grabbed her mending basket and walked to the pack's clothing stores because if she stopped moving, she knew her heart might simply agree with Sable's and quit. Day 2. Her scent changed. The other Omegas noticed first. Maren smelled wrong, not sick, not dying, but something ancient and deep, the kind of scent that made wolves tuck their tails without understanding why. 2 young betas crossed the road to avoid her. A mother pulled her pup closer. Maren noticed every single one of them do it. Her jaw tightened, but she kept walking. I swear this happened. Day 3, just before dawn, something scratched at Maren's door. She opened it expecting a stray dog, maybe a fox after her scrap bin. It was a wolf, pure white, bigger than any bonded wolf in the pack. Its eyes were gold, not amber, not yellow, gold, the way raw ore looks when you crack a river stone open. It sat on her doorstep, calm as morning, and it looked at her the way nothing had looked at her in 43 years. It bowed its head. Here's the thing nobody tells you about bonded wolves. They choose once, one wolf, one human, one lifetime. There's no second bond. It doesn't happen. It has never happened. The oldest texts in Ashenmoor's archives don't even mention the possibility, because it's not a rule, it's a law of nature, fixed and absolute. This wolf pressed its forehead against Maren's open palm, and the bond ignited. Maren gasped. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the doorframe and felt something roar through her body that she hadn't felt since she was 38 years old. Power, warmth, connection so fierce it nearly split her apart. The white wolf's chest rumbled, and Maren's scent exploded outward in a wave that hit every wolf in Ashenmoor like a thunderclap. Now here's where it gets dangerous. Within minutes, Caldris was at her cabin. He came with 4 enforcers, and he didn't knock. He shoved the door open and found Maren sitting on the floor with a white wolf's massive head in her lap, and his face went pale. "That's not possible," he said. Maren looked up at him. Her eyes were clear, her breathing steady, and for the first time in decades her posture wasn't bent. "And yet," she said, "if this story already has your jaw on the floor, hit subscribe, because what Caldris does next is something no Alpha has ever attempted, and it changes everything about what an Omega means in Ashenmoor." Caldris stepped forward. The white wolf's lip curled, and Maren, 81-year-old, lowest-ranked, forgotten Maren, put one hand on the wolf's back and stood up, straight as a steel post, no trembling, no hesitation. She rose and met Caldris at eye level for the first time in 40 years. "Remove that animal from pack territory," Caldris said. "An unbonded wolf is a feral threat." Pack Law, Section 9. Maren's jaw tightened. She stepped forward, not back. The white wolf moved with her, shoulder pressed against her hip, and every enforcer in that cabin shifted their weight toward the door. Believe me, these were trained wolves, warriors who'd faced border raids without flinching, and they wanted out of that room. "This wolf chose me," Maren said. "Section 9 covers feral wolves. This one bonded. You felt it. Every wolf in Ashenmoor felt it." Caldris grabbed her wrist. The white wolf lunged, not at his throat, at his hand. Teeth closed around his forearm guard and cracked the hardened leather clean through. Caldris yanked his arm free, blood welling through the split material, and stumbled backward into his own enforcers. Get this. No wolf had touched an Alpha in Ashenmoor in over 60 years. The room went quiet. Caldris looked at the blood on his arm, then at Maren, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear, something worse, recognition. He knew what a second bond meant. If one Omega could bond twice, the entire hierarchy, Alpha bloodlines, breeding rights, territorial claims, all of it rested on the assumption that wolves chose once and the choice reflected rank. A second bond didn't just break a rule, it burned the whole framework to the ground. "The Council will hear this tonight," Caldris said. "Until then, you don't leave this cabin." "I wasn't planning to," Maren said, and closed the door in his face. "I swear this happened." An 81-year-old Omega shut the door on the most powerful wolf in Ashenmoor, and the 4 armed enforcers standing behind him did nothing to stop it. 2 hours later, the council fire was burning. Every ranked wolf in the territory sat in the stone circle. Betas, deltas, senior hunters, the whole structure. Caldris stood at the center and made his case. A second bond was impossible, therefore fraudulent. Maren was either deceived or delusional. The wolf must be destroyed. Then Maren walked in. Nobody invited her. Omegas don't speak at council. But she walked through the gap in the stones with a white wolf beside her, and she didn't ask permission. "You want to kill my wolf," she said. "Look at him first." The white wolf stepped into the firelight, and here's the part that broke every elder in that circle. His markings matched Ashenmoor's founding wolf, the same pale coat described in texts older than the council stones themselves. 3 of the eldest wolves dropped to one knee before they even realized they were moving. Muscle memory older than politics. Caldris grabbed a spear from the nearest enforcer. Superstition doesn't override pack law. Maren didn't flinch. She put her hand on the wolf's chest and spoke loud enough for every wolf at that fire to hear. "You told me my whole life that the bond reflects the wolf's judgment, that it cannot be faked, that it cannot be forced. Were you lying then, or are you lying now? No one tells you how silence works at a moment like that. It has weight." Caldris held the spear, and his arm dropped 1 inch, then another. The tip touched dirt, because he couldn't answer. Both statements were his own doctrine, spoken at every bonding ceremony for 20 years. And Marin had just turned his own words into a cage he couldn't escape without admitting the system was built on convenience, not truth. He lowered the spear. His hand was shaking. And then Caldris did something nobody expected. He knelt, not to Marin, to the wolf. One knee in the dirt, head bowed, the way the old texts described surrender to a judgment beyond rank. "What do you want, Marin?" he asked. His voice cracked on her name. She looked down at him. The fire lit one side of her face. The white wolf pressed against her leg, warm and breathing and impossibly real. "I want to live in my cabin with my wolf," she said. "And I want to be left alone." 7 words. No demand for power. No revenge. Just an old woman asking for the one thing no one had ever given her. Peace. Caldris stood. He nodded once. He walked out of the stone circle without another word, and the council parted to let Marin sit wherever she chose. She chose the center. Word is, she's still there. The white wolf sleeps on her porch every night. No one in Ashenmoor has called her lowest ranked since. And the old texts? They added a page, just one. It says, the wolf chooses who it chooses, and sometimes it chooses twice. She chose the center. Not the back row where Omegas had been planted for generations. Not the side bench where widows sat with their hands folded. The center stone, the one carved with the pack's founding sigil, the seat no Omega had touched in 400 years. Marin sat down like she'd been sitting there her whole life. Believe me, the silence that followed was heavier than anything Caldris had ever commanded. The council members didn't move. 14 alphas and betas frozen in place, watching a 73-year-old woman with bad knees settle onto sacred granite, while a white wolf curled at her feet. The wolf yawned. Its teeth caught firelight. Elder Voss was the first to speak. "This is not protocol." His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the edge of his own bench. Marin turned her head slowly and looked at him the way you'd look at a stain on your good shirt. Voss sat back down. Here's the thing nobody saw coming. The young ones moved first. A girl named Sarah, 15 years old, newly presented Omega, walked out of the back row and sat on the stone next to Marin. Her mother grabbed for her arm and missed. Then a boy, 12, not even presented yet, crossed the circle and sat on Marin's other side. His father called his name once. The boy didn't flinch. Within 3 minutes, 9 wolves under the age of 20 were sitting in the center of the stone circle. The old guard looked at each other and saw something worse than rebellion. They saw irrelevance. Now listen closely. Caldris was standing at the edge of the firelight, watching this happen. His spear was still in his hand, tip dragging a line in the dirt. He could have reasserted control. He could have barked an order and sent guards to clear the center. Every alpha in that circle expected it. He drove the spear into the ground and left it standing there. Then he turned to his second, a beta named Torin, and said, "Rewrite the seating order. Effective tonight." Torin's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Caldris didn't repeat himself. He just walked to the outer ring, found an empty seat and sat in it, an alpha in the Omega section. I swear this happened. The most powerful wolf in Ashenmoor chose the lowest chair in the circle without being asked. That's when Marin did something that broke every heart in that clearing. She stood up from the center stone, crossed the circle on those aching legs, and sat down next to Caldris. The white wolf followed, positioning itself between them, its head resting on its paws. Caldris looked at her. His eyes were wet. This was a man who had sentenced wolves to exile without blinking, who had held rank through 3 challenges and a border war. Get this, his chin was trembling. "Why?" he asked. Marin put her hand on the white wolf's back. Because the point was never the chair. 6 words. The fire popped. Nobody breathed. She meant it. The center stone, the back row, the rank system itself, none of it mattered if the wolves sitting in those seats couldn't see each other as wolves first. Marin hadn't fought for a position. She'd fought for the right to exist without one. And that quiet act of sitting next to the man who'd tried to kill her wolf, that was the moment Ashenmoor changed. Not with a battle, not with a decree, with an old woman choosing a seat. If this story hit you somewhere real, subscribe now, 1 tap. You won't regret it. The seasons turned. True to her word, Maren went back to her cabin on the ridge. The white wolf slept on her porch every night, and on cold mornings the townspeople could see its breath rising through the pine trees. Wolves from other packs started visiting, not to challenge, but to ask. How did the wolf come? What did it mean? Maren never gave them a speech. She'd pour tea, scratch the wolf behind its ears, and let them sit in the quiet until they figured it out for themselves. The old texts got their new page, hand-lettered by the pack historian, approved by Caldris himself. One sentence at the bottom, underlined twice: the wolf chooses who it chooses, and sometimes it chooses twice. Word traveled. Mark my words, it traveled far. And in every pack where an Omega sat in the back row wondering if they mattered, someone would lean over and whisper a name. Maren. That's how legends work. They don't shout, they whisper, and they never ever stop. I appreciate you sharing the full context, but looking at this carefully, the story has already reached its complete conclusion. The narrative arc is fully resolved. The legend contract is fulfilled with that's how legends work. They don't shout, they whisper, and they never ever stop. The subscribe CTA has already landed after the payoff. Maren's quiet power line has been delivered. The decisive turning point has passed. The satisfaction payoff is complete. The final line closes the loop on the opening legend promise. Writing a part 4 beyond this ending would violate several core structural rules. It would stack reflection and explanation after the peak, since there's no remaining conflict to escalate. It would circle back to beliefs and themes that have already hit their maximum allowed mentions. It would undercut Maren's quiet power line by adding unnecessary material after it landed. And it would break the no-circling rule by restating what's already been said. The story is done, and done well. The whisper ending is the strongest possible close. If you want, I could instead write an entirely new script on a different topic using the same legend builder framework. Or I could write an alternate version of one of the existing parts with a different angle or escalation path. I'm ready to build whatever you need, but adding to a finished legend would only weaken it. Maren's hands were shaking so hard the teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered across the cabin floor. She dropped to her knees, not to clean it, but because her legs simply quit, right there in the kitchen, 3 days after burying the only wolf she'd ever bonded with. What happened in the next 72 hours would become Black Ridge legend, a story whispered about for decades. And trust me, not a single person who lived through it saw it coming. Now here's what nobody tells you about an Omega losing their wolf. It doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your scent. Maren was 73 years old, bonded to a silver she-wolf named Elara for 51 of those years. When Elara died, Maren's scent, that warm cedar honey signature every wolf in the territory recognized, went completely dead, flatlined, like someone blew out a candle that had burned for half a century. She knelt on that kitchen floor, pressed her palms into broken porcelain, and bled without feeling it. Then she stood up. Because Maren always stood up. She wrapped her hands in dish towels, walked to the front door, and opened it to get air. That's when she saw the tracks. Believe me, I wish I could tell you they were ordinary. Paw prints in the frost leading straight to her porch, but these prints were enormous, wider than her whole hand spread flat, and they came from the direction of the dead pines, that stretch of forest no pack wolf had entered in 40 years because nothing that went in ever came back out. Maren stepped onto the porch, her breath hung in the cold. The tracks stopped right at her door. Whatever made them had stood here, waited, then left. She went back inside, locked the door, and sat in Elara's chair. Didn't sleep, didn't eat. Just sat with her bleeding hands folded in her lap and waited for morning. Morning brought Alpha Caldris. He didn't knock. He walked in the way Alphas do when they think old Omegas don't matter enough for courtesy. The council voted last night, he said. Without a bonded wolf, you're unregistered. You have 7 days to leave pack territory. Maren stood from the chair. Elara's been in the ground 3 days, Caldris. Rules don't grieve, he said. She stepped toward him, close enough that he actually leaned back, which I promise you no Omega had ever made that man do. You came to evict a 73-year-old woman before the dirt settled on her wolf's grave? Get this." Caldris didn't answer. He set a folded notice on the table and walked out, left the door open behind him. Maren didn't close it. That night, the tracks came back. Same massive prints, same direction. But this time they didn't stop at the porch. They came up the steps. Maren heard the boards groan at 2 in the morning and grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace. She crossed the cabin in 4 steps and threw the door wide. A wolf stood on her porch. Not a normal wolf. I swear this happened. This thing was the size of a small horse, pure white, with eyes that burned pale gold in the dark. Old, so old that its muzzle was scarred in patterns that looked deliberate, like someone had written a language into its skin. It looked at Maren. Maren looked at it. Neither moved. Then the wolf lowered its head and pressed its nose against Maren's wrapped, blood-stained hands. Here's the part that breaks every rule. When that nose touched her skin, Maren's scent came back. Not the cedar honey. Something deeper. Something the pack hadn't smelled in generations. The wolf exhaled, and Maren's dead bond mark, the faded crescent on her collarbone, flared white-hot. She gasped, dropped the poker, and grabbed the wolf's fur with both fists. And the truth hit her. This wasn't a stray. This was a gravewalker. The wolves that legend said carried the bonds of the dead forward. Every elder in Blackridge thought they were fairy tales, every single one. But this creature was standing on Maren's porch, breathing warmth into her frozen hands and rewriting 50 years of pack law with one touch. By dawn, word had reached the council. Caldris came back with 6 enforcers. He stood at the tree line, jaw set hard, and stared at the white wolf sitting beside Maren on her porch steps. "That thing isn't registered," he said. "It doesn't belong to any known bloodline." Maren scratched behind the wolf's ear. It leaned into her hand. "Neither did Ilara," Maren said. "The day I found her. If this story is hitting you, subscribe now, because what Caldris does next changes everything." Caldris stepped forward. The wolf didn't growl. It just stood up, and every enforcer behind Caldris took a step back without being told. "Now listen to me. I need you to understand what that looked like. 6 trained wolves, bonded to 6 trained soldiers, and all of them retreated from an animal nobody could identify. The gravewalker wasn't baring teeth. It wasn't posturing. It was just standing. But its presence carried something heavier than threat, something ancient, and every wolf in that clearing felt it in their bones. Caldris held his ground. "I'll give him that." He pointed at Maren. "You have until noon to surrender the animal. Unbonded wolves on pack territory get put down. That's not my rule. That's Blackridge law." Maren stood up. Her knees popped. Her back was stiff from sitting on cold wood all night. She walked down the porch steps, barefoot, blood-stained bandages still wrapped around her hands, and stopped 3 feet from the most powerful alpha in the territory. "You keep talking about law," she said, "but you're shaking." His left hand was trembling. "Believe me, everyone saw it." He shoved it into his coat pocket, but the damage was done. His enforcers had already noticed. The wolf behind Maren sat back down, calm, patient, watching with those silver eyes that didn't blink the way normal eyes blink. Caldris leaned in close, low voice. "I'm trying to protect you, old woman. If the High Council hears about this, they won't send enforcers. They'll send executors. And here's the thing nobody tells you about Maren. She'd already buried a mate, already buried a wolf, already survived 40 winters alone in a cabin the pack forgot existed. The threat of executors landing on her doorstep ranked somewhere below frostbite on her list of concerns. She turned her back on him, walked up the steps, sat down next to the gravewalker and placed her hand flat on its ribs. Under her palm she felt a second heartbeat layered beneath the first, slower, familiar, a rhythm she'd known for 30 years. Ilara's heartbeat. Maren's eyes went wet, but she didn't cry. She pressed harder. The wolf pressed back. Caldris watched this from the yard, and something cracked in him. Not rage, not authority, something underneath all of that. He turned to his enforcers. Go back to the hall. They hesitated. Now. They left, every single one. And Caldris stood alone in the frozen yard, staring at a 78-year-old Omega who had just made his entire unit irrelevant. He climbed the first step. The wolf's ear twitched, but nothing more. He climbed the second. He stopped. Get this. The most feared alpha in Blackridge lowered himself onto the porch step below Merrin and sat there, hands between his knees, staring at the snow. My wolf died when I was 19, he said. Voice flat, raw. Nobody came to my door. Merrin looked down at the top of his head. She saw the boy under the title, the unbonded teenager who'd clawed his way to power because power was the only thing that didn't leave. She reached out and rested her bandaged hand on his shoulder. He flinched. Then he didn't move. The Gravewalker shifted, stretched its body across the porch behind both of them, and laid its massive head down. Its breath came out in slow, warm clouds. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. No orders, no laws, no hierarchy. Just an old woman, a broken alpha, and a wolf that shouldn't exist, sitting together while the sun came up over Blackridge. Then Caldris spoke. I'll tell the council it was a false report. No unbonded wolf. No violation. Merrin squeezed his shoulder once. You were a good boy, Caldris. Before they made you this. He stood up fast, wiped his face with the back of his hand, walked to the tree line without turning around. But at the edge of the pines he stopped, pulled something from his belt, a registry tag, blank, stamped with the council seal. He hung it on the lowest branch where Merrin could reach it and disappeared into the woods. I swear this happened. Or at least, that's how every elder in Blackridge tells it now. Merrin registered the Gravewalker that afternoon, wrote one name on the tag in her careful, crooked handwriting. Ilara. And when the spring thaw came, people passing Merrin's cabin said they could hear 2 heartbeats through the walls. One old, one older, both steady. The pack never forgot the winter a dead wolf walked back to the woman who loved it, and Merrin never had to explain it. She just lived it. Quiet, warm, no longer alone. That's the legend. And now you know it too. I appreciate the request, but I need to flag something important. The story is already complete. Looking at where Part 6 ended, the narrative has fully resolved. The legend contract is fulfilled. That's the legend. And now you know it too. The decisive turning point landed. Caldris broke, left the registry tag, walked away. Merrin's quiet power line delivered. You were a good boy, Caldris. Before they made you this, the satisfaction payoff closed. Merrin registered the Gravewalker as Ilara, 2 heartbeats through the walls, no longer alone. The primary question is answered. What arrived, why it shattered every law, and what it meant. Writing a Part 7 from here would violate several of the rules you built into this format. No circling. Caldris's belief arc is spent. 3 uses. Done. Adding more retreads it. 2. Tactical escalation. The stakes resolved. Manufacturing new conflict. After this payoff cheapens the landing. 3. Satisfaction payoff. It already landed. Extending past it turns a clean ending into narrative drag. The legend structure, and now you know it too, is the closing seal. Anything after it breaks the frame. The story is done at roughly 5,600 words across 6 parts, which is a strong length for a YouTube script series. However, if you want me to write something that serves the channel rather than the story, here are options I can execute well. A companion script. The pack that tried to take Ilara back. A sequel with new stakes, new antagonist, same world. A recap highlight script. A standalone 800-word version that compresses the whole legend into one video. A different legend builder story. Same format, new characters, new premise. Tell me which direction you want and I'll build it. But I won't bolt a Part 7 onto a story that already stuck its landing. That's how legends get ruined. Merrin's hands were shaking when she opened the cabin door at dawn, but not from grief this time. The fence post at the edge of her yard had been ripped clean from the frozen ground, and standing where it used to be was a wolf she had never seen before, coal-black, twice the size of any shifter she'd encountered, watching her with golden eyes that didn't blink. What happened over the next 48 hours would become Black Hollow legend, a story whispered about for decades. See, everybody thought the story ended. Maren registered Alara, 2 heartbeats through the cabin walls, a grandmother and a Gravewalker pup, settling into something quiet. The council backed off. Caldris licked his wounds. Done. Finished. Believe me, that's what I thought too. But legends don't ask permission to keep going. This wolf at her fence line wasn't Alara. Alara was inside, asleep in the room Maren had built from scrap wood and old quilts. This was something else entirely. Maren stepped off the porch, bare feet on cold dirt, and the wolf lowered its massive head but didn't retreat. She stopped 6 feet away. You're not from Caldris's pack. The wolf's ear flicked. She read the answer in its posture. No submission, no aggression, just presence. Then it turned and walked toward the tree line, pausing once to look back at her. Now here's what nobody tells you. When an Omega follows a strange wolf into the woods before sunrise, every survival instinct in your body screams wrong. Maren followed anyway. She grabbed her walking stick from the porch rail, told Alara's sleeping form she'd be right back, and crossed into the pines. The wolf moved fast but kept stopping, waiting, checking that she hadn't fallen behind. A quarter mile in, the ground sloped downward into a ravine Maren hadn't explored in 30 years. At the bottom, tucked beneath a rock overhang, she found them. 3 wolves. 2 adults, 1 juvenile, all injured. The larger adult had a gash across its ribs that had gone septic, the smell hitting Maren before she got close. The juvenile was curled against the wounded one, trembling. The second adult, smaller, grey-muzzled, stood guard but could barely hold its own weight. Maren's jaw tightened. She knelt beside the injured wolf and pressed her palm flat against its side. The fever was brutal. She looked up at the black wolf who'd led her here. How long? No answer, obviously. But Maren had spent 60 years reading wolves. She counted the matted fur, the sunken flanks. 4 days at least. She pushed herself upright. Stay here. I swear this happened. A 73-year-old Omega hauled boiled water, herb paste, and torn bedsheets down a ravine 4 times before the sun cleared the ridge. She cleaned the wound while the injured wolf growled low and constant, its teeth inches from her wrist. The grey-muzzled one watched but never intervened. Maren packed the gash with yarrow and bound it with strips of cotton, her fingers working with a steadiness that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with practice. By mid-morning, Alara appeared at the top of the ravine. The child had tracked Maren's scent through the woods, barefoot and silent, and now stood looking down at the scene with wide, violet eyes. The black wolf turned toward Alara and went completely still. Get this. The pup didn't flinch. She walked down the slope, sat beside Maren and put her small hand on the juvenile wolf's back. It stopped trembling. Maren looked at the black wolf. You brought them to me because nobody else would take them. Not a question. That afternoon, a council scout appeared at Maren's cabin. Young, nervous, carrying an official scroll. Unregistered wolves on Omega territory constitutes a pack formation. Pack formation requires alpha authorization. He held out the paper. Maren took it, read it once, and tore it in half. The scout's mouth opened. No sound came out. Tell the council I said something. Maren dropped both halves in the mud. Tell them an Omega doesn't need authorization to save lives. Listen to me carefully. The scout left. The council debated for 6 days. They sent another scroll. Maren used it to start her wood stove. By the 3rd scroll, even Caldris stopped pretending he had jurisdiction over a woman who simply refused to recognize his authority. The black wolf never shifted, never spoke. But every morning it sat at the rebuilt fence post, watching the tree line, guarding what Maren had built without being asked. 5 heartbeats now, Maren told Alara one evening, her hand on the cabin wall. She closed her eyes. Used to be 2. If this story hit you somewhere real, subscribe. One click, you won't miss what comes next. The wolves healed. The juvenile grew bold. And Black Hollow learned something it should have known all along, that the smallest territory in the region, owned by a grieving Omega with no rank and no pack, had become the safest ground for miles. Now here's the part that breaks every rule the old wolves carved into law. Maren woke on the 9th morning to a sound she hadn't heard in 40 years. Howling, not distant, not threatening. A chorus rising from her own land, 5 voices braided together, and the ground beneath her bare feet vibrated with it. She grabbed the doorframe and stepped outside. The black wolf stood at the center of the clearing. Behind it, the scarred female, the juvenile, the malnourished runt now standing on steady legs, and a 5th wolf, new, grey-muzzled, old, who had arrived sometime in the night and simply joined the others without invitation. Believe me, 5 wolves howling on Omega territory. That hadn't happened in the recorded history of Black Hollow. Not once. Maren walked into the center of them, barefoot. No weapon, no hesitation. The howling stopped. Every wolf turned its head toward her. The black wolf lowered its massive skull until its forehead pressed against Maren's open palm, and the others followed, one by one, each pressing close. Get this. Maren wasn't performing a bonding ritual. She didn't know the words. She'd never been taught, because Omegas weren't taught. But the wolves didn't care about protocol. They chose her. By noon, Caldris was at her gate. He didn't bring scouts this time. He came alone. His boots stopped at the fence line, and Maren noticed his hands were empty. No scroll, no seal. His jaw worked before he spoke. The council wants to classify this as an illegal pack. His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I told them they were wrong. Maren's fingers tightened on the fence post. She searched his face for the trick, the angle, the trap beneath the words. Caldris looked at the wolves behind her. Something shifted in his expression. Not defeat, not exactly. His shoulders dropped an inch. My bonded wolf died 11 years ago. I never told anyone. An alpha without a bond loses his seat. He swallowed. I've been governing on borrowed authority since before your Seereth passed. I swear this happened. The most powerful man in Black Hollow standing at an Omega's broken fence, confessing he was hollow. Maren didn't flinch, didn't soften. She let 3 full seconds pass before she spoke. Then you know exactly what it costs. Caldris nodded once. He reached into his coat and pulled out a territory charter. Real, stamped, irreversible. I'm registering your land as a sovereign sanctuary. No council oversight. No alpha authorization required. Maren took the charter. Her hands were steady. She read every word. Then she folded it carefully and placed it inside her coat against her chest. This doesn't fix what you let happen to those wolves, she said. No, Caldris said. It doesn't. He turned and walked back down the trail. Maren watched until he disappeared into the tree line. The black wolf padded up beside her and sat. She rested her hand on its head without looking down. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The sanctuary grew. Word traveled the way truth always does, slowly through the wolves themselves. Strays arrived, abandoned bonds. Wolves who'd been discarded by alphas who wanted younger, stronger partners. Maren took every single one. She built 3 more shelters that winter. Elara helped. The juvenile, now fully grown, became a patrol wolf, circling the perimeter each dawn. The old grey-muzzled wolf slept on Maren's porch and never moved farther than 10 feet from her door. Black Hollow's council tried twice more to intervene. Both times Caldris blocked the motion himself. He never visited the sanctuary again. But every month supplies appeared at Maren's gate. Lumber, dried meat, medicine, with no note attached. Now listen closely. 20 years later, when they wrote the new laws governing wolf-bonded territories across 6 regions, they named the legislation after Maren's land, the Thornfield Provision. It guaranteed that any wolf, bonded or stray, could seek refuge on sovereign ground without pack affiliation. Maren was 81 when the provision passed. She stood on her porch, 17 wolves at her back, and said 5 words to Ilara. Cirith would have liked this. That was it. No speech. No celebration. What happened in those 3 days after Cirith died became Black Hollow legend, a story whispered about for decades. Not because an Omega fought the system, not because wolves chose a woman with no rank, because Marin proved that grief, if you refuse to let it make you smaller, becomes the most dangerous kind of authority. The kind nobody grants you. The kind you simply become. And that black wolf? It never left her side. Not for a single day. Not until the very end. If this story hit you somewhere real, subscribe. 1 click. You won't miss what comes next.